Hello, this is Ed Chapman, and this video cast is part one in the series on photosynthesis. And we're going to explore the basic idea of what photosynthesis is and how light plays a role in this important metabolic process. The second big idea in AP biology is about free energy and how living cells use free energy to do the things they need to do to continue, both to stay alive and to continue through time as species. They need to grow, they need to reproduce, and they need to maintain internal balance. To do this, they need energy, and this energy has to be in a form that can be used to do work. And we've learned that this is chemical energy. Photosynthesis is where the chemical energy is coming from, or at least where most of it is coming from. Photosynthesis is the most important way that producers convert light energy into chemical energy. It's not the only way, but it's the most important way, the one that's most familiar and most common in Earth's ecosystems. It's also a very ancient process. It's been performed for billions of years by prokaryotic bacteria, and of course it's performed today by eukaryotic algae and green plants, along with photosynthetic bacteria that are still around and still doing very well. Photosynthesis is based on the physics of absorbing light, which happens when light strikes a pigment. And we can treat these pigmented molecules as enzymes because they're proteins. And finally, photosynthesis is how producers produce the biomass that includes food energy, which is the energy, of course, that gets passed through food chains and food webs. Eukaryote plants, like in this picture, are probably the most familiar photosynthesizers to most people, but there are also lots and lots of bacteria that have been photosynthesizing for a very, very long time. This is a picture of some strand-shaped bacterial cells, or a filamentous blue-green alga that it frequently causes problems in waterways that have become polluted. But don't forget, these guys are prokaryotes, but they're excellent photosynthesizers, and they've been doing this for a very long time. Photosynthetic bacteria, as I said, have been around a very long time. We know this from fossil evidence. All right, this is a chunk of fossilized algal material. Okay, photosynthetic blue-green algae, otherwise known as cyanobacteria. You may recognize cyan as it means bluish. All right. So these cyanobacteria have been around for a very long time. We know that because they left fossils. And if you go to certain bays in Australia, in the warm tropical seas around Australia, you can find these structures called stromatolites. Okay, these pillowy looking structures are actually built over many, many, many years by algae, which grow layer by layer, and they slowly get taller each time the tide changes. And this layering produces a material that can be fossilized. So we know that we have these alive today, and we have rock that's very old. It's 2.5 billion years old of these fossilized stromatolites. So we know that these photosynthetic bacteria have been doing what they've been doing for a very long time. And the really cool thing about this is where the oxygen that we breathe, all the oxygen that we breathe today, is coming from. All right. So these cyanobacteria that have been on Earth for so long are actually what have cranked out the oxygen, the atmospheric oxygen, that's incredibly important to us. All right, the way this happened is, or where do we get eukaryote cells from? Well, if you remember the endosymbiosis theory we talked about earlier, you can have a photosynthetic bacterium and a host cell that can combine by endosymbiosis to produce a symbiotic relationship between the host cell and the photosynthetic bacteria. And then if you give it enough time, these once free-living photosynthetic bacteria, or cyanobacteria, have actually become what we call today chloroplasts. And they contain the pigments and the membranes and the compartments for doing a process that we call photosynthesis. So this diagram here shows you how we got chloroplasts today from once free-living photosynthetic bacteria, otherwise known as cyanobacteria. There are non-photosynthetic producers. These belong to a special group of bacteria-like organisms called the archaeans. Okay, they do their production of biomass by using chemicals rather than light. And because they make their sugars using energy from chemicals, especially sulfides, they're called chemosynthesizers. We'll talk more about them later. Here's a picture of where you might find chemosynthesizers. They live in in and around deep ocean vents, which are communities of organisms that spring up around places where hot seawater is bubbling back up into the cold seawater surrounding it in complete darkness. And there's a chemical reaction that happens deep underground. And these chemicals, which are carried up into the ocean now, are actually eaten by these archaean bacteria, and which do chemosynthesis and produce biomass or produce chemical energy without any sunlight at all. So it's no longer true to say that photosynthesis is the only way that food webs get started. Chemosynthesis can also be a way that food webs can be started. All right, so just to kind of review here, the most important way producers convert light energy into chemical energy is photosynthesis, and that photosynthesis is a very old process. It's been around a long time, first done by bacteria, and today done by bacteria, algae, and green plants. Okay, now let's focus a little bit on what light is. Light is a form of energy. It's an electromagnetic band of energy, and the first law of thermodynamics states that you can't create or destroy energy, you can only transform it. So you probably already know that light energy can be broken up into wavelengths or colors. You may have heard of Roy G. Biv. This is Roy G. Biv backwards, but I've added a few extra words here to kind of flesh it out. So we've got violet going to blue, cyan, green, yellow, orange, and red. All right. These words actually stand for wavelengths, and scientists have broken these colors down into bands of wavelength. Wavelengths that are smaller than 380 or shorter than 380 are what we call ultraviolet. They're not visible to our eyes. We can't see them because our eye pigments can't detect them. Then if you get long enough, a little bit longer than 380, we get into the purple range, and so on as we move towards the right here. Anything longer than 750 nanometers, of course this is in the nanometer scale, is called infrared. Again, this is a wavelength of light that our eyes cannot see. But so we see everything between ultraviolet and infrared, and so this range of color here is called the visible light spectrum. So this is visible light. Okay, and this is for whatever reason, evolution has given us the pigments in our eyes to allow us to see things as short as purple or as long as red. Now, chlorophyll is a pigment molecule that has the ability to absorb certain wavelengths of light. And when it absorbs this light, it changes in a way that allows something special to happen. We'll talk about that in a minute. But chlorophyll is able to absorb certain colors better than others. Chlorophyll can absorb violet light and red light the best. Okay, it absorbs green light the worst. So this is why when you shine light on things containing chlorophyll, they appear green, because green is the wavelength of light that is preferentially reflected. It's the light that comes out of the chlorophyll molecule and that your eye can then see. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So if you shine all these different colors of light, which would be white light, onto a chlorophyll molecule, notice that the greenish light is the light that's reflected. So according to this picture I have here, we have this color here and this color here being reflected. So kind of a cyany green to a green color is being bounced back off the chlorophyll molecule. All these other colors are being absorbed to some degree. All right. So this is why when you shine white light on plants, they appear green, because these are the two colors that they're reflecting the best, or absorbing the least best. This was shown in 1881 in a very famous experiment by a guy named Engelmann. And what he did is he took a prism, and he used the prism to break light up into the Roy G. Biv colors you probably are familiar with. So he's got a little prism of glass, and he's shining white light into it, and coming out of it is all the different colors of the rainbow. And he's using this to shine all these different colors of light onto a filament of green algae. All right, so the algae over here, this cell is getting purple light, this part of this cell is getting green light, and this cell down here is getting mostly red and orangey light. All right, and then he put this filamentous algae into a culture of bacteria. Now these bacteria are aerobic, which means they're attracted to oxygen. So as you can imagine, as you shine light on this filament of green algae, it's going to start doing photosynthesis and kicking out O2, all right? So it's going to start releasing O2, which is a byproduct of photosynthesis. The algae are attracted to O2, so wherever there is more oxygen, there's going to be more bacteria. And you can see how the bacteria are accumulating on the algae strand in the places where the oxygen is being made the fastest, which happens to be kind of right around in here and right around in here. That's where we're getting a lot of oxygen. In this color range right here, we're not getting very much oxygen produced, so the bacteria avoid this area. So Engelmann showed very early on, using some living tissue, some living algae and some living bacteria, he actually showed that photosynthesis works best in this color light and over here in this color light, and works the least best where the light is green. All right. Today we use something called an absorption spectrum to show this. Chlorophyll absorbs light. It peaks. Okay. So here we have on the y-axis going up and down here is absorption. Absorption. All right. So as you go up, absorption increases. So you can see that chlorophyll is absorbing very well at this wavelength, which is a bluish light, and it's also absorbing very well at this wavelength, which is a reddish light. And it's absorbing the least well right around in here, which is kind of a bluish, yellowish, greenish area right in here, okay? So this is called the absorption spectrum of chlorophyll. We'll stop there and pick up with our second video cast next time. Thanks for listening.